Hey everyone, here we are, Module 9, and this week we are looking at an anime film which is called Akira. The release date for Akira was 1988, so we've been pretty much sticking in the 80s for the last few weeks. I think we watched an 85 film, an 86, an 87, and here we are, 88. Anime, it refers to Japanese animation that's made, it's Japanese animation that's actually in Japanese, right? The way they talk about anime in Japan is a little bit different than how we talk about anime in the rest of the world and how we reference it and what we call anime and things like that. Some of you may be really up in tune with anime and know a lot more than I know, right? This is a film I was introduced to and thought it'd be a good look to kind of mix it up and look at something that was more animation in style as opposed to traditional live action filmmaking. So I thought we'd give it a shot. The style of anime is pretty unique, right? They focus a little less on the smoothness of the animation, whereas in the United States, that's really what they're trying to accomplish, is just really smooth, naturalistic animation. And they concentrate more on the details of the settings. They use very sharp angles in the drawing and the artwork. They're also interested in a lot of camera effects, like panning the camera and zooming in on things and like doing the Dutch angle deal, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. And they're also interested in, they usually have characters that have very large emotive eyes, meaning they're very expressive when they're animating them with their eyes. So that's also very classic in the anime style. This film is a cyberpunk action film, like that's what it's considered. That's the genre that it's in. Now, cyberpunk is a subgenre of the sci-fi genre, right? It usually uses futuristic settings that are highly technological but deal with social collapse or social decay, right? So that's typically the subject matter that you would see in cyberpunk, and that's exactly what we're dealing with in this particular film. Akira means wisdom, intelligence, or truth, and I apologize if I'm pronouncing it a little bit wrong. Again, my foreign languages I'm not very in tune with, but the name Akira means wisdom, intelligence, or truth. So that's what the film is supposed to be all about, kind of deal. Directed by Katsuhira Otomo. Again, gonna butcher it. So I'm assuming, hopefully, I hope some of you are having fun at listening to me butcher names. Very well respected screenwriter, animator, film director in Japan. Also a manga artist, and I'm assuming I'm saying manga correctly. Again, could be another word I'm butchering. Akira is based on a manga of the same name. Now, what manga is basically comic books or graphic novels, which are hugely popular in Japan. This manga, Akira, actually ran from 1982 to 1990, and Otomo was the creator of the graphic novel, and also got to make the film, direct the film, had a large role in the film. Manga, these graphic novels, are typically printed in black and white, so all the color and all of that stuff kind of came to life in the film, right? And the other thing too is the movie doesn't really kind of take on the whole entire story, because as you see here, this film came out in 1988 and this manga ran all the way to 1990, so it didn't actually even complete the story till 1990, so it doesn't actually cover all those parts. Obviously it didn't exist yet. The storyline, Tokyo, Japan in 2019, which is 30 years after the film actually starts, right? So this is like futuristic. So the film was made in 88. It's looking at 2019. But I think the film actually starts a little bit sooner than 1988. And there is this kind of nuclear explosion that kind of decimates Tokyo. And you find out later that Akira is the one that caused this large explosion. And now we're in this new Tokyo that's been built, and again, it's very technologically advanced in 2019, probably more so than we actually are, and it deals with the decay and the corruption and things that are actually happening in and around the city. So it's a pretty interesting story, very action packed. The animation is pretty great. Like it's very dynamic. A lot of sharp angles. Again, a lot of dramatic lighting, things like that. So we'll talk more about that as we move on through the PowerPoint. But it's a very fun film. It's about 2 hours long, so it's a little bit longer on the runtime for an animated movie. But it's pretty well done stuff. The themes that they explore through the course of this film, again, some of them are very similar to all the films we've been looking at. Part of that is just to kind of round out this conversation that pretty much everywhere we go in the world, everybody's kind of dealing with the same kind of things. It's a very small world when you think about it in that regard. But it's also fun to look at the different styles and the different ways that different filmmakers approach the same topics. So neglected youth is the theme that they kind of run at or look at in this particular film. How power corrupts, like if the wrong people get power, how they use it to do bad, right? The government is corrupt. Talks a lot about that. It also talks a lot about destruction and rebirth. Right, the whole idea of rebirth is something that you'll see as kind of a theme, starting at the beginning and then working your way all the way to the end of the film. So take a peek for those. See if you can kind of pull those themes out of this storyline and what they're trying to achieve as storytellers. Animating Akira. Okay, so this is a $5.5 million film, which I guess in today's standards, that isn't even that high. But back then, this was the most expensive anime film of all time. So they put a lot of money into this, and that record of 5.5 million didn't last very long. Just like the next year later, a year or two later, they made other anime films that cost more money than that. One of the things I wanted you to think about in just talking about animation, I know you've all watched animated films. You probably all have kind of a basic understanding of how an animated film works, but I just wanted to kind of break it down for you so you can kind of see what kind of work actually goes into producing this kind of stuff. It's a 2-hour-long movie. So in a 2-hour-long movie, there are 7,200 seconds in that 2-hour-long movie, okay? Now, how animation works is you have to kind of draw out the moves one frame at a time. Right? And there are 24 frames in a second of film. Okay? So anytime they want to get 1 second of runtime, they have to draw 24 pictures. And that's just the character 24 times, right? You still have the background and any other layers and how many other people are in the frame and all that good stuff. Those are all different layers that are kind of stacked on top of each other and photographed. So there are a lot of drawings. There are over 172,000 drawings in one layer of this movie, okay? And every shot in the movie is going to have at least 2 layers, okay? You get your background and then your actor. Those are at least 2 layers that you're going to have. So there is a ton of drawings in each movie, and it is painstaking work, right? My start actually was in stop motion animation, so that's like puppet animation, like The Nightmare Before Christmas or something like that. And it is frame by frame, taking pictures as you move these little puppets 1 frame at a time. So again, just wanted to give you some insight as to how these films are made. There's a contextual video that's going to give you some behind the scenes in this movie, and it's very impressive, like to watch the detail into the drawings and things like that. There were 60 key animators who worked on the drawing of this movie. I couldn't find anywhere how long it took them to actually animate the film, but I'm sure it took them a couple years to do it. And again, 60 animators, and that's key animators. So there are what are called in-betweeners. So they're going to be the key animators usually do like the big moves, give you the A mark and the B mark and where they're trying to get to, and then somebody else will kind of fill in the move on the way. So there's a lot of people that work on these. You'll see the credits; they're pretty long. In the cinematography, even though it's animated, there's still cinematography design involved in the production of the show, right, of the movie, okay? The style of this film, it's very high contrast. Okay, so you're going to see a very large difference between lights and darks in some of the scenes. You also see these bright flashes of light and nice streaks and beams of light, which is a great little effect that they kind of add in the animated world in this particular film. Again, they also use these camera effects, meaning the camera pans, so the camera's moving, or zooming in on something. Those are effects. They have these very cool effects. You can kind of see it in the background of this particular slide. I thought it was a cool effect, and it was something that was interesting that I hadn't really seen before. before. They had light trails coming off the lights of the motorcycles as they were chasing each other through the cities at the beginning of the film. And I thought that was a cool way to kind of use animation to do something that's a little bit trickier, especially in 1988. Trying to do that kind of work in live action would have been very painstaking. Another thing that they do a lot of, we talked a lot about so far about shapes in composition, and the triangle is one that I keep showing you, right? Another element in composition are lines, like vertical lines, horizontal lines, diagonal lines, okay? And diagonal lines have been proven to kind of create subconscious kind of tension or chaos in a frame, right? So when you see a frame that has diagonal lines, whether it's like the camera's Dutched and tilted a little bit, we've talked about Dutch angles, or they're just kind of the way we're shooting something, lines are kind of being created in a diagonal way. That creates kind of tension and drama, right? And that's what this film is all about. So you're going to see a lot of diagonal lines in this film. And I'll put a little something up in the contextual page that will kind of give you the idea of what we're looking at and what we're talking about when we're talking about lines in composition. Talking about acting performance. Okay, so acting in this film, again, also a little bit different, but there are actors and they are performing. Number one, all the dialogue was pre-recorded, meaning they recorded it before the animation was done, which my understanding is for anime is actually very unique. That's usually not the case. These things are usually produced really, really quick. So they do the animation and then somebody like watches the animation and voices it over kind of thing. But in this, they actually pre-recorded it and then the animators use the voice actors to kind of add the motions and actions to the voice, okay? Which again, I've heard it's really unusual in the anime world to do it in that order, but that's how most animation films are done in the United States for sure. But the actors were able to see what are called animatics. So basically what we're talking about here is very high-tech storyboards. So anytime you make a movie, they actually draw out kind of frame by frame, not frame by frame, but shot by shot, what we want to see visually on screen from one shot. Then we're going to cut to this next shot. Then we're going to cut to another shot. And we kind of draw out a little frame of what it is we want to look like. And they definitely do that in animation before they start the production, right? But animatics, they actually go a little further and actually animate those little frames, right? So they like might zoom in on it, or they might have the camera pan across it, or they just run it in real time with the dialogue paced out right? So we know how long it's going to last on screen, so we know how fast we have to say the dialogue kind of thing, right? So the actors did have the ability to look at what are called animatics, which again are just kind of animated storyboards. There's no real motion in the characters. It's really just animated drawings. Okay, in the sense of we're looking at a still box and we're going to move in on it or move back on it or pan to the left or pan to the right, that kind of thing. And the acting in here is pretty dramatic, which matches the artwork, right? The artwork is very dramatic, again, very sharp angles, very diagonal lines, very high contrasty lighting. That's very dramatic stuff. And so the acting in here is also very dramatic by design, and it fits what we're doing. I wouldn't say that it's in any particular style other than it meets the artwork where it is, and that's the way that it really gives it life to the production and the overall production of it. When we're talking about sound design would go back to, part of it would be pre-recorded audio, right, of all the acting. That's one thing that they did that would be defined by sound design. The other thing is it has a very unique kind of soundtrack, and it was influenced by some Indonesian, like classic Indonesian percussion music, right? That's one of the things that was very influential in the soundtrack to this film. And then the other thing that was pretty influential was, we've talked about it before back for Ran, the Kurosawa film, is Japanese no theater, which is that dramatic dance drama type performance. And they have very specific styles of music in that genre. And this film, the soundtrack for this was influenced by that as well. And you'll hear it in the soundtrack. Definitely has a big soundtrack, sound effects and the motorcycle sounds. And there's a lot of specific kind of noises that are anime kind of noises. It's hard to explain what they are, kind of laser beam sounds. And there's all kinds of stuff. And it's very full in its sound design, right? But one thing I wanted to point out is kind of where some of the music and the background music came from. Again, Indonesian percussion, and then this Japanese no theater influences. Finally, in editing, it's a little bit different here because in an animated film, they don't animate extra. They animate the amount of movement and whatever they need for a particular shot, and then they move to the next shot. So there's no extra cutting of anything out. There's no editing of any of that stuff, right? It's because if you over animate, let's say you animate something and you're like, oh, I'm going to cut 3 seconds out of that. That is probably, a day's worth of work for somebody, like 10 hours. Like I used to go when I would work as an animator, I would spend 10 hours at work for a day. And at the end of the day, I might have like 7 seconds done. Okay. So if you have somebody over animating 3 seconds here and 2 seconds here and 5 seconds there, you're talking about days of work and you're just going to edit it out. So that doesn't happen in animation. So the editing is really just assembling the stuff in the proper order. Right? There were some computer-generated images, backgrounds used in this particular film, and so those computer-generated images were added in post-production and editing. And also, you'll see some light effects that were also added in digitally after the fact, and so those things would be added in editing and post-production. But as far as a traditional edit, there really wouldn't be an edit because you're really just going to be assembling the movie in the order and then adding transitions, whether it's fades or wipes or different ways to get from one shot to the other, which we've talked about in previous lectures. Akira was very inspirational to a lot of filmmakers. And again, one of the other things I want you to pull out from this particular class is the idea that everybody influences everybody else. Past filmmakers inspire and influence the next generation of filmmakers, right? And it doesn't just stay with live action, right? So this animated film was influential to The Matrix, right? They talk a lot about the two directors, the sisters talk about how they were influenced by this film in a lot of interviews. Another movie called The Chronicle. There's a film called Looper, and then even Stranger Things. Those are some of the films and stories, and that one of them's dramatic narrative, like episodic. But those filmmakers talk about how they were influenced by this film and how it inspired what they were doing in their particular genre, in their particular film. Okay, so that's something that I really hope that everybody kind of pulls out, and I've talked about it a little bit here and there. I never focused on it this much so far yet, but people are finding influence by the work that was done before it, and that's how we get to the point where we are now, and that's how we get the evolution of any kind of art form. Cinematic terms for this week. We got anime, which is a Japanese style of animation that's done in Japanese. We got cyberpunk, which is that kind of offshoot genre, subgenre of the sci-fi world, and FPS. Now I kind of glazed over this when we were talking about animation, but FPS stands for frames per second. And in motion picture, there are 24 frames per second. So that's how many frames, that's how many images the pictures or the cameras are taking to get 1 second of runtime, which is what creates the illusion of motion. Okay? We had talked about animatics, which are basically just fancy storyboards. If that's all you get out of it, is that they're like kind of animated, and animated is the wrong word because I don't want you to think that there's like full movement and animation going on. There isn't. It's really just kind of taking the drawing that gets made about what we're trying to see, and we'll kind of like, again, zoom in on it or pan across it or do any kind of thing like that, and it runs for the runtime that we need it to run when it's going to be in the movie. Okay, so it is kind of like pacing out the timing of the movie in still drawings, right? That's what animatics are. And then diagonal lines, the idea that when you see diagonal lines in composition, if you just look at this frame right here, if you look at the word Akira, like the backside of the R, the post of the R, see how it's kind of at a tilt like that? That's what we're talking about when we're talking about diagonal lines. If you look at the poster of Akira that's on the frame, there's that kind of street line that's going straight up. That's a vertical line in the composition, which has the sense of, creates the sense of kind of authority over stuff, and it's very noble kind of thing. And so that line is helping create that feel in the composition. So that's what we're talking about in Diagonal Lines. You'll look at the conceptual page, and it'll probably have something else on there. Hopefully you enjoyed this film. I think it's a fun film to watch. It's something a little bit different, going to animation as opposed to the live action that we kind of stick with the rest of the way. If you have any questions, reach out. I'm here to be a resource. Everybody's been doing a great job so far, so I've been having a lot of fun reading everybody's work.